Welcome back as we are delving into the book of James, which for all of us as disciples ought to be an uncomfortable experience for us because he really begins to strip off the layers of our own hypocrisy and religious overtones. We're going to pick him up in the 22nd verse of chapter 1. He begins by saying, "Do not merely listen to the word to deceive yourselves, but do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like a man who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But the man who looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom continues to do this, not forgetting what he has heard, but doing it, he will be blessed in what he does. He who looks in a mirror," in those days, mirrors were actually polished metal, not the kind of mirrors that we have today by any means. And he's saying that sometimes first thing in the morning, we may do a cursory glance at that particular image of ourselves in a very, very blemished way and not think about it the rest of the day. On the other hand, we ought to be the kind of people that look at that mirror and become very reflective on what we see. Now, that mirror to the believer is the perfect law, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is us looking at his standard, not measuring ourselves against each other or our own standard that we set, but looking at ourselves in reflection against God's standard. He says, "Do not merely listen to the word to deceive yourselves." I know for most of us, it becomes a little irritating when we see people who claim to be servants of God, claim to be obedient, claim to be disciples, who talk a good talk, but don't walk a walk. They are ones who spend perhaps a long time in discussing the things that ought to be done, and yet are not obedient in doing them. In the day of Jesus, people would spend hours and hours in the temple debating the laws and come back day after day after day just in debate and learning the laws, but not very good at being obedient to obeying the law. Well, we recognize the fact that that happens today, some 2,000 years later, because there are those of us that spend an inordinate amount of time in the Word of God, parsing it, looking at it, going back sometimes to even the Hebrew and the Greek derivative. And so we look at these scriptures. We go to retreats. We go to Bible studies. And there's a part of us that think that if I just give myself to the study of the Word of God, that's adequate. And James is saying not so fast. Because what God really wants us to do is to apply the Word to our daily existence and to be doers of the Word, not hearers only. So many people believe an hour or two on Sundays is just sufficient. That's all we need. That way we've heard a good sermon. We've listened to a good Bible study. We've been around other Christians. That's sufficient. But our lives don't reflect our discipleship. Our lives don't reflect what we're doing. Let me give you an illustration that I think is really good. You see, the president of his own company, employing several hundred workers, was preparing for an extended business trip. Before leaving, he sat down and wrote a lengthy letter detailing projects he wanted accomplished in his absence, clients he wanted contacted, and the task that he expected his employees to do while he was away. He finished it, put it in the company post office box, rode to the airport, and boarded his plane. On his return several months later, he immediately noticed the grounds were unkempt. The grass obviously had not been cut in weeks. The lawn was littered. The shrubs and the trees needed trimming, and the doors were marked with handprints. He parked his car and hurried inside. Employees were lounging in the chairs. drinking coffee and talking, feet propped up on desk, and most weren't dressed in office attire. A ping pong table had been set up, and an array of video games littered the flat surfaces. His arrival went unnoticed. Angrily, the CEO called a meeting of the entire management staff. When all had assembled, he began his tirade. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," he said. "Everything is completely different from what I expected it would be. What's been going on here? Didn't you get my letter?" Their faces brightened, and someone replied, "Yes, sir, we did. We love that letter. We read it almost every day. In fact," said one man, "I've even memorized several paragraphs from your letter. It's terrific reading." Others chimed in. Another spoke saying, "Sir, we've organized some study groups. We gather at least once a week and reread portions of your letter to make sure that we understand it all." Dumbfounded, the president asked, "But did you finish the projects? Did you call the clients? Did you do the things I asked you to do?" At that, everyone looked down. One man finally spoke on behalf of the group saying, "No, sir. You see, we're still studying your letter." Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like contemporary Christianity, 21st century USA. And here we are looking at this admonition from James. Do not be simply hearers of the word of God, but doers also. Don't deceive yourselves into thinking that just studying his letter is sufficient, because we need to be about the Lord's work. We who talk the talk need to walk the walk. What would you feel like if Jesus came in one of our worship services and confronted you? What have you been doing? "Well, sir," we might respond, "we've been reading your letter over and over. Sometimes we read it daily. Sometimes we read it once a week. Sometimes we gather in small groups and read your letter. But have you done the things that I've asked you to do?" Jesus would reply. He said to the early disciples, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do the things that I say? Why is it that you claim to be my followers," he is saying, "and yet aren't obedient?" Well, they enjoyed listening to him. They loved watching his miracles. It was a good time. They enjoyed being among the following of other disciples. But their obedience, well, that was another matter entirely. So today I'm imploring you and me as well, because this is really a reflection of me too, to be about the Lord's work. Put his directives into action. Put his request into our mandate for discipleship. And don't just read his letter. Do the things that he asks us to do. I hope and pray that you have a great day. May the Lord bless you.